And tonight we're very blessed to have Dr. Nels Hoffman give us a presentation on SETI, UFOs, and the Heavenly Host to say. So would you all join me in welcoming Dr. Nels Hoffman?
Thank you, Susan. Minds Beyond Earth. This is a talk about three topics: the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, also called SETI, UFOs, and angels, or the heavenly host. For thousands of years, humans have looked to the skies for guidance or signs, help and hope, or just to enjoy the splendor of the heavens. The psalmist wrote that the heavens declare the glory of God. And we see that the heavenly realm is beautiful. It's worth looking at. It's very regular and dependable. It's almost unchanging, unlike the earth where we live, which is full of chaos and often suffering. Some good things, but plenty of bad things. Perhaps the heavens is the abode of the gods, or God himself, depending on your beliefs. Ancient people believed that by looking at the sky, you could learn a lot. Well, you could learn about the changing seasons from, for example, the flight of migratory birds, or the rising of the star Sirius in the springtime, which foretold the flooding of the Nile quite accurately. You can tell tomorrow's weather: red sky at morning, red sky at night. Ancient people believed you could tell about impending catastrophes if you saw a comet in the sky. That could be a warning of disaster. They also believed that you could learn about the birth, death, and fortunes of royalty from the stars. We would no longer go along with them in that belief, but they believed that the sky was full of signs and was full of beings. In fact, that those heavenly bodies were in many cases actual gods, actual divine beings. What we call the planets, they gave the names of divinities. So that was way back then. That's what the ancient people did. But in 1959, Giuseppe Cocconi and Philip Morrison were interested in looking to the heavens as well. They speculated that advanced civilizations are out there patiently waiting to hear from us. They published this paper in Nature Journal, 1959, in which they say that it follows then that there are some stars, rather like the sun, where possibly there are civilizations with technical possibilities much greater than those now available to us. So advanced civilizations. And they assume that perhaps these advanced civilizations established a channel of communications, and they look forward patiently to the answering signals from the sun, which would let them know that a new intelligence had entered the community of intelligence. So this was their guiding vision, and they proposed a search of stars similar to the sun within 15 light years distance, and they picked a particular radio wavelength that they thought would be worth tuning into, and they suggested, well, you should look for maybe a sequence of small prime numbers. If you hear a cluster of pulses that come in clusters of prime numbers, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, there's no natural process that would create such a signal. So that kind of thing might be a pretty straightforward way to get in touch with another civilization. Now they were looking for hope. Morrison was looking to the heavens for hope. He was a veteran of the Manhattan Project, and I was pleased to find this link between SETI and the Manhattan Project. Morrison had been a student of Oppenheimer's at Berkeley, And he, in fact, transported the core of the gadget, the Trinity test device, to Trinity test in a Dodge sedan. Now, this photograph here is not of Morrison. I couldn't find a picture of Morrison. This is Herbert Lair and Henry Dagland Jr. loading part of the Trinity device into a Dodge sedan for transport. But the scene with Morrison must have looked very similar to this. Morrison was on Tinian Island helping to load the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs on the B-29s. Morrison hoped that by discovering an advanced civilization, he could show that perhaps a scientific society could survive the danger posed by nuclear weapons. Morrison wrote an article 20 years after that first Nature publication, and he quoted Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction author. Clarke had a similar hope, knowing that some advanced civilization had passed their nuclear crisis would give us renewed hope. It would help dispel present nagging doubts about the survival value of intelligence. So I think that's a nice bit of humility from Arthur Clarke on the subject of intelligence. So here we are, so many thousands of years later, still looking to the heavens for hope. At that same time, or shortly thereafter, Frank Drake, who was at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory at the time, started a very small-scale secret project to look for interstellar radio transmissions. He called this Project Ozma. He may have been aware of that Nature publication. And so he began a program observing a couple of nearby stars that are similar to the sun. And so for 6 hours a day for a few months in 1960, then he tuned his receiver's frequency near this 21 centimeter line of interstellar hydrogen and scanned a 100 hertz wide bandwidth up and down the dial, looking for radio power packed into a very narrow bandwidth. That again would be a highly artificial kind of a signal, something that natural processes would not produce. He used existing technology, and the estimate is that the total cost of this project was about $2,000. So he did this on the cheap and secretly, not wanting to attract attention, and frankly, perhaps a little worried about being embarrassed by other people discovering what he was doing. And then, by 1975, the federal government began supporting the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. For almost 20 years, the government spent money on this search by NASA, amounting to about $55 million over the entire period of time. So I work at the lab, many of us do. Let's look at a funding profile here. Here's the amount of dollars spent year by year, well less than $2 million here in the early days. By 1982, Senator William Proxmire killed the funding for this program. If you're as old as I am, you may remember Senator Proxmire, who was valiant in searching out wasteful government spending and bringing it to an end. Well, Carl Sagan visited Proxmire and somehow convinced Proxmire to back off, and so funding was restored in 1983 and continued for a while, and then finally started to get serious here in 1989, amounting to over $10 million a year here by the early 90s, and at this point they were building special purpose receivers specially suited for this, until another senator, Richard Bryan, also on the lookout for wasteful spending, killed the program. At this point, Carl Sagan was extremely unwell, and he died a few years later. If he had been healthier or lived longer, perhaps he could have once again exercised some magic to keep the program going. Oh, here's one of the antennae used in that search. Today, SETI continues with private funding. So there is the SETI Institute. They're based, I think, in Mountain View, California, and they have a very nice website with all kinds of information, and very nice graphics, as you see one example here. They're funded by private wealth, and they actually they don't have that many full-time staff, but they collaborate with many serious scientific researchers who are involved in searching for life in the field of astrobiology, looking for at least microorganisms or signs of life on planets, moons other than the Earth. There are other programs than the SETI Institute. There's something called the Breakthrough Initiative, again, privately funded. The Breakthrough Initiative partners with SETI. Here is a press release from May of this year, and a nice photograph of the VLA down near Socorro, New Mexico, and a description of the kind of search that they are going to get involved with. It's called the COSMIC Project. And COSMIC will look for very narrowband signals, 1 hertz wide. And as I said a little while ago, it's postulated that artificial signals will be uniquely narrowband. It's the way we humans communicate. We pack a lot of energy into a very narrow band of frequencies. We do skip around from frequency to frequency these days as a means of keeping communication secure. Nevertheless, if you find a signal that's very strong in a narrow bandwidth, that's got to be artificial. So that's what they're looking for. There are other projects like this. The Galileo project is headed by Professor Avi Loeb at Harvard University. Loeb is the founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative, the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at Harvard Smithsonian, former chair of the astronomy department at Harvard. I mean, this guy has credentials, but he has established this Galileo project to look for physical evidence of extraterrestrial technology. Okay, not just radio signals, but actual chunks of stuff, perhaps, that might have come from minds beyond Earth. Says the goal here is to bring the search for extraterrestrial technological signatures of extraterrestrial technological civilizations, that's an ETC, into the mainstream of transparent, validated, systematic scientific research. Okay, so there's a lot of activity, sometimes funded by the government, at least involving serious scientists looking for minds beyond Earth. But I think this raises the question of whether aliens, minds beyond Earth, are not simply waiting for us to find them. So let's think about that. Let's talk about UFOs. As I assume you're well aware. What's that?
Stay closer to your microphone so we can record.
Oh, this microphone. Yeah. As I imagine most of you are aware, UFOs are a mainstay of popular culture. Whether they exist or not, people are certainly fascinated by the possibility. And in fact, people persistently report strange experiences with objects and agents from the sky, or perhaps from some other dimension, but from someplace else. Here is the cover of a publication from 1926. This is Amazing Stories, a science fiction magazine from 1926 showing a UFO and then some earthlings presumably in a greenhouse-like contraption. I think one of them is shaking his fist at that UFO, and that might be a gun that they're getting ready to point at it. Not sure. By 1930, close to 100 years ago, we already knew what flying saucers and spaceships were supposed to look like. So here's a clipping from the Buck Rogers comic strip of November 1932 showing some kinds of spacecraft blasting away at adversaries on the ground using something that looked like laser beams, actually. Here on the right is the cover of a different publication. This is Astounding Stories, not Amazing Stories. from 1930, and you see a spacecraft looking something like a flying saucer flying around near asteroids and planets. So the popular idea of what it was to fly in space and perhaps encounter aliens was entering the public imagination by 100 years ago. You may be familiar with the 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast episode, which showed at least that the public was anxious about alien invasions. This, as you may know, was in October 1938. In fact, it was the day before Halloween, October 30th. A radio episode directed and narrated by the actor Orson Welles, based on a novel published in 1897 by H.G. Wells, about a Martian invasion of the Earth. And this episode is famous for inciting a panic among members of the listening audience, some of whom dialed in late to the show and didn't hear the introduction that this is just a dramatization of H.G. Wells' story, and thought an actual Martian invasion was going on, because the episode was broadcast by Wells in the voice of a radio news broadcaster. So it sounds like a blow-by-blow radio news account of this weird invasion. Some people may have missed both that it was a dramatization and that those were Martians, and had just have thought it was an invasion. And this was 1938. There was plenty of anxiety about the impending war in Europe. Now, it's possible that the extent of the panic was exaggerated by newspapers in order to discredit radio. So even way back in 1938, one news medium was worried that a new news medium was taking listeners and taking audience away. Of course, we know this kind of thing is still going on as news media worry about the influence of the internet, and so the same kind of anxiety was going on back in 1938. Here is a clipping from New York Times, which apparently really played up the so-called panic. And here is a photograph of Orson Welles. He's 23 years old. He caused all this trouble. He's explaining to the reporters that he had not intended to cause panic. So, once again, you see that even back in the 1930s, people knew what it was to worry about aliens and flying saucers. Now, the current kind of interest that we see in UFOs really blossomed since the end of World War II, which that was 1945, the end of the war. There was a media frenzy surrounding the reports on June 24th, 1947, that a civilian pilot reported seeing 9 objects flying in formation near Mount Rainier. And then there were hundreds of copycat reports that followed during the summer of 1947 from around the United States. And by the way, 1947 was when the Roswell incident occurred, the recovery of some debris near Roswell, New Mexico. That incident didn't draw a lot of attention at the time, but we'll talk about that in just in a few slides. It resurfaced some years later. Hundreds of copycat reports in 1947. You see a clipping here from a newspaper saying more flying saucers are being seen. Men of science are being interviewed, being asked what they think is going on. Here, the Army Air Corps was getting P-51 fighter planes ready to go intercept these flying discs. Hundreds of copycat reports. Is that some kind of mass panic? Was it post-war fear of communist influence? Was it anxiety about nuclear weapons? Philip Morrison was worried about nuclear weapons. There were certainly new and unfamiliar aircraft being tested at that point. Jet aircraft were coming into service around that time. Was it some kind of quasi-religious sentiment, a sort of a fervor for something new? Or was it something else altogether? Could there have been something really strange going on that triggered all those reports? Well, since that time, there has been a succession of government projects and offices that have investigated UFOs, unidentified flying objects, UFOs. Or today, we call them UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, but actually now it's unidentified anomalous phenomena, because these things don't just happen in the air, they might happen in the water too. Here are some of the projects carried out by the Department of Defense, beginning even in 1947. Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book ran for 17 years, quite a well-known project, and their science advisor was J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer who wrote a book called Close Encounters, based on his experience. There was a hiatus from 1969 to 2007. As far as we know, there was a hiatus, let's put it that way. When the new program began, this UAPTF started in 2017. But now we have had the National Defense Authorization Act of 2022, and which was passed in 2021, I believe. And it requires the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to file an annual report about UAPs, and it's led to the establishment of the AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, in the Department of Defense, whose job it is to collect and try to resolve reports of UAPs. Simultaneously, NASA has established their own independent study team that's entirely civilian. NASA will not be dealing with classified information at all. The Defense Department will have access to classified information. What's the motivation here? Well, you know, it's national security, for one thing. We want to be sure that our adversaries are not collecting data on us. We are all aware of the Chinese spy balloon. We want to be sure that our adversaries have not discovered some breakthrough aerospace capability that we really had better learn about. And furthermore, if things are flying around in our skies, they pose perhaps a flight safety risk. These are flight hazards. And then finally, science, I think, which is perhaps what you would call just the kind of curiosity about what these things could actually be, if there is more going on here than can be simply explained. So, as I mentioned, this 2022, or the Defense Authorization Act of 2022 requires this annual report from ODNI. Their first report in 2022, which you can download online, catalogs 510 total UAP reports. There are no good stories in this report, okay? I mean, if you're gonna download this report and think you're gonna read some really cool stuff about UFOs, I'm sorry to disappoint you. It is basically a listing of numbers of reports and what has been done with these reports. One thing they say is that there were already 144 reports over the 17 years prior to the establishment or the passage of that Authorization Act. A few of them have been, well, some were observed with multiple sensors, some had unusual flight patterns, some of them involved near misses with an aircraft. Then there are 247 new reports since March 2021, and that says there were more reports in the 1.5 years since 2021 than had occurred in the preceding 17 years. So one thing that tells you is that it's pilots and others now feel safer in reporting these weird things. I think there was stigma, of course, associated with saying you saw this weird thing in the sky, but part of this whole process now is to try to remove that stigma, and the result is there are many, many more of these reports. So of the 366 new reports, many of them are easily explained, but about half of them are still uncharacterized or unattributed. You see the word clutter. Clutter means birds, weather events, or airborne debris like plastic bags. Okay. I don't know why that this thing is there. Let's just stick that off to one side. It seems like somebody is always claiming that the government is hiding information about aliens. Undoubtedly you've heard of the UFO whistleblower. Well, maybe you've heard of the UFO whistleblower lately, David Grush. Far back as 1956, this civilian UFO study group, NICAP, was founded. And I should say there have been any number of civilian UFO groups. Throughout its existence, NICAP has argued that there was an organized governmental cover-up of UFO evidence. The Roswell incident I mentioned, this debris was recovered in 1947. It wasn't clear what the debris was from. And then the incident was basically ignored for about 30 years until a book was published in 1980 about the incident, because some people involved with the incident had come forward to say they thought perhaps alien bodies had been recovered and that the government was hiding the evidence they had. So, again, an alleged government cover-up. Just recently now, David Grush, the UFO whistleblower, he's a USAF officer and a former intelligence official, claims that the government maintains a secretive UFO retrieval program and is in possession of non-human spacecraft and dead pilots. And that people have been killed to protect the secrecy of the program, though just not him yet. And he accuses Arrow of withholding information. If you've listened to Grush, you know that he has no new evidence himself. He's just reporting what he's been told. My reaction to Grush is that you can never disprove a cover-up. If you say there's a cover-up, what can you do? You can't claim, well, I've looked everywhere the government could possibly have been hiding anything and didn't find anything, therefore there's no cover-up. No, that doesn't work. You'll just be told that the government is better at hiding things than you had thought. I think we have to ask whether someone benefits from the public's belief in a cover-up. And I think there are perhaps groups who would benefit from the popular belief that the clandestine organizations in the government are not to be trusted and are lying and hiding important things. On the other hand, maybe those clandestine organizations benefit from the belief that they do know a whole lot more than they're letting on and that they can be trusted to protect it. So maybe everybody benefits from the public's belief. Okay, well, I can't mention the subject of UFOs without telling a story. So, here, insert favorite UFO story at this point. And there are thousands and thousands of such things. If you are at all interested in the phenomenon of UFOs, just go online, start looking. You'll find all kinds of great stuff. So, to me, way more impressive than David Grush, the UFO whistleblower, are these two guys from Taos, New Mexico. Okay, these are two bow hunters from Taos. Josh Brinkley on the left and Daniel Lucero on the right. They were hunting for elk on Cerro de la Hoya, northwest of Taos. Cerro de la Hoya is one of those big shield volcanoes like San Antonio Mountain or Ute Mountain that you pass as you drive from Taos on north Colorado to San Luis, Fort Garland. They were hunting for elk on the 1st of September 2019, Cerro de la Hoya. There's a caldera at the top of the mountain. And Josh Brinkley reports that he noticed two figures on his side of the caldera. They were very tall, standing side by side, staring right at me. The shape that would be like their heads, it looked like they had huge hoods on, and it looked like two ribbons coming off either side to a point at the top and bottom. And here he has his notebook there where he has written his account and he's drawn pictures of what he saw. That was Brinkley. Lucero was not with him at that point. They had separated. Lucero did say when Brinkley came back, he said he was clearly agitated. He was moving in a noisy way, which is not the way you move when you're hunting. And he knew Brinkley was upset. He had seen something. They left. They came back the next day, 2nd of September, and both of them, as they were driving, saw a big tent structure like a circus tent, 50 to 60 feet tall. When they topped the hill, though, it was gone, just gone. Now, if you know hunters, perhaps you are a hunter. If you know bow hunters, especially, They tend to be really serious guys, you know, not perhaps given to flights of fancy. On the other hand, these guys they work construction, and they have done construction for movie sets. And I just think, well, could it be they heard somebody pitching a science fiction movie idea, and somehow this became entrenched in their imaginations? I don't know. Anyway, I like stories like this because they're not getting famous from this. No secret organization is benefiting from this kind of thing. This is in the Taos News. You can go to the Taos News, has a nice website. They're on the website. I've got the link here at the bottom of the page. And these slides will be on the web if you want to pursue this story. Well, we know that UFOs and aliens keep gripping the popular imagination. The E.T. movie by Steven Spielberg, it's now 40 years old. It came out in 1982. But it's just a good example of how popular the idea of extraterrestrials is. Area 51 was... a lot of people decided it would be a good idea to storm Area 51 a few years ago. The SETI Institute pointed out 5 reasons not to do that. The SETI Institute is very good about trying to debunk popular imaginative ideas about UFOs and try to keep things objective and scientific. The X-Files was a popular series. Stranger Things is a current series that focuses on weird activities associated with other dimensions, not necessarily distant intergalactic locations, but other dimensions. But that sort of counts. Okay, what I want to do now, finally, as our last topic, is to pass from the realm of fringe science onto the realm of, you might call it fringe religion, but let's just call it culture and religion. And we'll talk about angels, the heavenly host. Angels are at least a cultural and religious concept. Perhaps they're much more than that. But they involve superhuman beings from the sky, like UFOs. And many cultural traditions since ancient times refer to superhuman beings. There don't happen to be any government programs that are searching for angels right now. And to be fair, I don't think there are any government programs searching for UFOs. That would be the wrong way to characterize what AARO is doing. They're trying to classify all those weird things in the sky, but UFOs may be trapped in their net eventually. So, since ancient times, the Assyrians, thousands of years ago during the Iron Age, conceived of genii who were winged creatures of extraordinary wisdom and power. You see the wings attached to this character here. In the Buddhist religion, there are devas who are messengers. They do not require food. They fly through the air. They shine by their own light. In fact, there are many categories of devas, which I will list for you momentarily. Here is a stone carving of Nike, the Greek goddess. This is in Ephesus, Turkey. Nike was the goddess of victory. She personified victory. A bit more about the Buddhist devas. There are 3 levels of them. Devas of the Arupya Dhatu, Rupa Dhatu, and Kama Dhatu. The highest level here is Arupya Dhatu. These devas have no physical form or location. They dwell in meditation on formless subjects. They do not interact with the rest of the universe. Here at this second level, these devas have physical forms, but they are genderless and passionless. And they are actually subdivided into four subdivided groups, depending on some of their attributes and what their tasks are. For example, to guard and protect Buddhism on earth. And then the lowest level here are the devas of the Kamadhatu. They have physical forms, and they are similar to humans, but they are larger than humans. And they lead the same sort of lives that humans do, though they are longer lived and generally more content. And again, there are numerous levels. There are at least 6 or 7 levels of these devas. So it's pretty elaborate angelology, let's call it. And of course, in Jewish and Christian tradition, there is a hierarchy of the heavenly host. There is one or perhaps more archangels. The archangel Michael is mentioned in the Bible. And other writings, I think the book of Enoch, for example, mentions other archangels who are at the top of the hierarchy. Then there are angels at a level below that. Then there are fallen angels who are acting in contrary to God's will. Then there are these beings called Nephilim and Rephaim. The Nephilim are the offspring of angels and humans, something intermediate between angels and humans. They are described in the Bible, in Genesis. And there's a similar concept in Greek mythology where a number of the actors in Greek mythology, such as Hercules and Atlas, and I believe Perseus and several others, are semi-divine in the sense that one parent is supernatural, the other parent is human. And so that's a similar concept to the Nephilim. The Rephaim are a little bit ambiguous. They are perhaps ghosts or spirits or shades, but perhaps they're giants, something like the Nephilim. So it's a little, I had a little trouble distinguishing them entirely from Nephilim. The angels are described as servants of God and watchers of humanity. The psalmist says to the angels, "Praise the Lord, you his angels, you mighty ones who do his bidding, who obey his word." Those are God's angels. In Daniel, I think this might be Nebuchadnezzar speaking here, "I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven." In the Gospel of Matthew, this is Jesus talking. Jesus is explaining one of his parables, and he says, "The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and cast them into a furnace of fire." So the angels will do the heavy lifting and the dirty work there at the end times. Now, it's easy to see similarities between some religious episodes and extraterrestrial encounters. So here is a painting from India of a Vimana, which is a flying chariot or a flying palace, which such things are discussed in Hindu scriptures. So if we saw something like this today, maybe we wouldn't call it a flying palace, we would call it a UFO. In the Hebrew Bible, we read of the prophet Ezekiel. This is the first chapter of Ezekiel, who saw a vision, he says, of the glory of the Lord. He says this was the appearance and structure of the wheels. He saw wheels within wheels. They sparkled. Each appeared to be made like a wheel, intersecting a wheel. The wheels did not change directions as the creatures went, and so forth. There's quite a lot of description in the first chapter. Now here's an artist's concept, quite a recent drawing by someone who's trying to interpret what this Iron Age Judean is trying to describe. There have been any number of paintings of Ezekiel's vision over the years, and of course they all reflect the technology of the time in which the graphic is produced. There's an entire website. Here it is, www.abovetopsecret.com, that has many images of this craft, let's call it, that Ezekiel might have seen. popular media have portrayed religions as a legacy of extraterrestrial encounters. You may be aware of the book by Eric von Daniken, who wrote this book, Chariots of the Gods, Unsolved Mysteries of the Past, published in 1969. And as I say here, 70 million copies of this book have been sold as of 2017. That's a huge number of books, of course. Now, what von Daniken claimed is that extraterrestrials or ancient astronauts visited the Earth and influenced early human culture. And he attributes many archaeological items to alien technology. Now, von Daniken's writings, he's written several books. He's been heavily criticized for factual and logical errors and sloppy writings. And frankly, I think he just underestimates the abilities of ancient humans. I think ancient humans were quite capable of carving large blocks of stone and carrying them long distances. But as the host of the History Channel series Ancient Aliens says in this meme, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. Von Daniken may well have been influenced by a more careful and limited set of conjectures by Carl Sagan and Joseph Shklovsky in a book they published in 1963, where they actually do a pretty serious analysis of what an ancient culture, an ancient human culture might have been able to preserve had they actually encountered an extraterrestrial civilization of advanced technology. And there are accounts of indigenous people who, when they met the first European explorers, preserved an account of that interaction over several hundred years. And you can go back and see that although they preserved it in oral tradition, handing it down, they did a pretty good job for at least several hundred years. So this is the kind of thing Sagan and Shklovsky tried to analyze. And but von Daniken carries this to absurd lengths, I think. Here, and this current series, Ancient Aliens, builds on von Daniken. Here is a little image from one of their episodes titled Spacecraft Brought Hieroglyphics to Ancient Egypt. And there's a great graphic of a UFO descending with hieroglyphs all around it. And it's cool, you know, it's really it's entertaining to watch. Then you'll see an episode where the narrator finds a Hindu religious kind of sculpture and says, the shape really looks like the cooling tower of a nuclear reactor. You don't suppose, you know, that ancient astronauts brought the secret of nuclear power to the Indian subcontinent several thousand years ago. I mean, it's that level of evidentiary support that just really doesn't quite make it. But it's entertaining TV, or entertaining video. So anyway, as I say, this concept is it exercises a grip on the popular imagination. So many books have been sold. Okay, getting close to the end of my talk now, and what I've done here is discuss sort of three domains of potential non-human intelligence, okay? Distant extraterrestrials who are unaware of humans, let's say. We're hoping to see radio communications from them, but we have no reason to think they might know, that would know we are here. Aliens and UFOs who perhaps are aware of humans, but they might also not be sympathetic to us, but they might be. We don't know. It's kind of ambiguous. And then angels who do, by all scriptural accounts, pay attention to and interact with humans. So they all get a checkbox here for being non-human intelligence. They all get a checkbox here for being in the heavens, or at least in another dimension, in some other place that is in some sense very, very far away and hard to access, whether it's another dimension or another galaxy. Is there scientific or government interest? Well, yes, in distant ETs, at least there's scientific interest. There was government interest. Aliens and UFOs, well, that's a stretch. The government is interested in UAPs, and if UFOs show up as a kind of the unclassifiable category, well, that would be a result of the government interest. Angels, no, there do not appear to be any programs searching for them right now. Are they scientifically detectable? Well, the betting is that the distant ETs are. And apparently UFOs show up, of course, on cameras and on radar, and Avi Loeb's Galileo project is hoping to find perhaps debris. Angels, well, I'm going to say we don't know. If angels, if the book of Genesis says that angels are capable of being the parents of human offspring, with a human being the other parent, then I have to say there's some kind of physical interaction that's possible, and so perhaps there would be a way of scientifically detecting an angel. Is there a religious connection? Well, I have question marks here. I think until distant ETs become something other than a matter of conjecture, we can't tell what the religious connection might be. Same way with UFOs. Angels, yes, of course, they are a major topic in religions around the world. So what's my point with this table? Well, you can see that with some very small changes between the aliens row and the angels row, there would be a lot of overlap between angels and UFO aliens. I think when we see something in the sky these days, because our culture is different than it was in Iron Age Judea, we would tend to call things UFOs that might have been called angels in those days. So this is to say, perhaps they're real, and because of our culture, we have a different way of interpreting sense phenomena today than was the case several thousand years ago. The closer they get, the less real they seem. SETI, those distant ETs, yeah, well, that's pretty scientific. The SETI Institute would certainly like you to think so. UAPs, well, this is more doubtful, but at least there are government projects that are going to help us with that. Angels, hard to say. Very few people experience angels or ETs or UFOs. But we sure like stories about them. So there's something in us that wants to hear about that. And that's my story for you this evening. Thank you.